The rain was coming down in sheets that night when Derek drove off without me, his taillights disappearing into the darkness like dying embers. I stood there soaked to the bone, clutching my purse and watching the love of my life abandon me at a highway rest stop 60 miles from home. What he didn't know was that within 3 years, I'd have my own personal security detail, and when Marcus stepped out of that black SUV to collect me, Derek's world would never be the same again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I used to think I had it all figured out. At 26, I was Mrs. Derek Harper, wife to Austin's most promising young real estate developer, living in a pristine suburban home with perfectly manicured lawns and neighbors who waved from their matching luxury sedans. My days were filled with charity luncheons, yoga classes, and helping Derek network with potential investors at endless cocktail parties, where I smiled on cue and never spoke unless spoken to. Derek had swept me off my feet during my senior year at the University of Texas. I was studying business administration with dreams of starting my own consulting firm. But Derek painted pictures of a different future. He talked about building an empire together, about how my organizational skills would be perfect for managing his growing company. I believed him when he said we'd be partners in everything. I believed a lot of things back then. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared during a dinner party at his mother Patricia's sprawling estate in Westlake Hills. I was discussing market trends with one of Derek's potential investors, sharing insights from my business courses, when Patricia's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. "Natalie, darling, would you mind checking on the catering staff? I think they need direction on the appetizer service." The dismissal was smooth, practiced, designed to look helpful rather than condescending. The investor turned his attention elsewhere before I could finish my thought about emerging markets in sustainable development. Derek didn't say a word, didn't defend my contribution to the conversation. He simply continued discussing his latest project, as if I'd never been there at all. That night, driving home in Derek's BMW, I tried to bring up what had happened. Your mother interrupted me right in the middle of making a point about the residential market forecast. Derek's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She was just being practical, Nat. Harold Morrison isn't interested in theoretical discussions. He wants to hear about actual deals, concrete numbers. What I was saying wasn't theoretical. I've been researching those markets for months. Look, I appreciate your interest, but real estate development isn't really your area. Mom's been in this business for 30 years. She knows how to handle these situations. The words stung, but I told myself Derek was just stressed about the deal. Patricia Harper had indeed built her own real estate empire from nothing, becoming one of Austin's most influential developers before retiring to focus on mentoring the next generation, which apparently meant micromanaging Derek's every business decision. I convinced myself that earning her respect would take time. The pattern repeated itself over the following months. At business dinners, I'd be relegated to discussing safe topics like home decoration or charity work with the wives, while Derek handled these serious conversations. When I suggested improvements to his project management systems or pointed out potential issues with zoning regulations, Derek would listen politely, then proceed exactly as he'd planned. My business degree gathered dust while I perfected the art of being decoratively supportive. The worst part was how gradually it happened. Derek didn't suddenly become dismissive or cruel. Instead, he slowly trained me to expect less, to want less, to be less. When I mentioned wanting to use my degree, he'd remind me how much he needed me to handle the social aspects of his business. When I talked about starting my own consulting practice, he'd point out how much time and energy his company required from both of us. When I suggested taking on a more active role in Harper development, he'd explain that his mother preferred to keep family and business separate. I began to feel like a carefully curated accessory in Derek's life, selected to complement his image, but never to overshadow his ambitions. My opinions became decorative rather than functional, my presence required, but my thoughts increasingly irrelevant. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if maybe I really didn't understand the complexities of his industry, if maybe my ideas really weren't as valuable as I'd thought. The isolation crept in slowly too. My college friends had scattered across the country, pursuing careers in different cities, while Derek's social circle became our social circle. His friends' wives were pleasant enough, but our conversations never went deeper than surface-level pleasantries about restaurants and weekend plans. I felt like I was slowly disappearing, becoming a shadow of the ambitious woman I'd once been. Derek's behavior became increasingly controlling, though he disguised it as protectiveness. He'd schedule social obligations without consulting me, then act hurt if I had conflicts. He'd make decisions about our home, our finances, our future, then present them as fait accompli with reasonable explanations for why my input hadn't been necessary. When I protested, he'd accuse me of being unreasonable or ungrateful, pointing out everything he provided for me as evidence of his love and commitment. The breaking point came on a humid Thursday evening in late September. Derek had been working on a major mixed-use development project, something that would establish Harper Development as a major player in Austin's competitive market. I'd spent weeks researching comparable projects, analyzing financing structures, and preparing a comprehensive market analysis that I thought might help his presentation to potential investors. I found him in his home office, surrounded by architectural plans and financial projections, looking frustrated and overwhelmed. This was my moment, I thought. My chance to finally contribute something meaningful to his success. I've been working on something that might help with the Riverside project, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk with my laptop and a folder full of printed research. Derek looked up with tired eyes. Nat, I really need to focus right now. Can we talk about whatever this is later? It'll just take a few minutes. I think you'll want to see this market analysis. I found some comparable projects in Dallas and Houston that might give you leverage with the investors. I opened my laptop and began explaining my research, showing him demographic trends, financing models, and market projections that supported his development timeline. For a few minutes, Derek listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asking questions about my methodology and data sources. Then his phone rang. It was his mother. Hold that thought, Derek said, answering immediately. Hi, Mom. No, I'm just going over some projections with Natalie. Actually, she's been doing some research on comparable projects. I couldn't hear Patricia's response, but I watched Derek's expression change from tired interest to something approaching embarrassment. Right, of course. No, you're absolutely right. I should have started with the Henderson report. He glanced at me apologetically. Can we pick this up tomorrow? I need to review some materials Mom sent over. The dismissal was polite, but absolute. I closed my laptop slowly, feeling my carefully prepared presentation dissolve into irrelevance. Derek, I really think this information could help. If you just look at the demographic analysis, Natalie. His voice carried a warning I'd learned to recognize. I appreciate the effort, but Mom's already provided the market research I need. She has relationships with the top analysts in the state. I don't want to confuse the presentation with conflicting data. Conflicting data? You haven't even looked at what I found. I don't need to look at it to know that Mom's sources are more reliable. She's been doing this since before you were born. The casual cruelty of the comment hit me like a physical blow. Before I was born, as if my 26 years of life, my education, my intelligence, my hours of careful research were all irrelevant compared to Patricia Harper's decades of experience. As if I were a child playing at being useful rather than an educated adult with valuable insights to offer. I stood up slowly, clutching my laptop and folder. Right, of course. I'll just go back to planning charity luncheons and picking out curtains. That's obviously where my skills are most valuable. Derek's sigh was heavy with exaggerated patience. Don't be dramatic, Nat. You know I value your support. But there's a difference between support and actual business expertise. Mom's trying to help me avoid mistakes that could cost us everything. And what exactly do you think I was trying to do? I think you were trying to help. And I love you for that. But sometimes the best way to help is to trust that I know what I'm doing. That night, lying in our king-sized bed while Derek slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember who I used to be. The ambitious college student who'd graduated summa cum laude, who'd dreamed of building her own business empire, who'd believed she could change the world through smart strategy and innovative thinking. That woman felt like a stranger now, buried under 3 years of gradual diminishment and systematic dismissal. I thought about my research sitting unused on my laptop, about the insights that would never see the light of day because they hadn't come from the right source. I thought about all the conversations I'd been excluded from, all the decisions made without my input, all the ways I'd been trained to accept less and expect nothing. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of the anger that had once driven my ambitions. Not the petty irritation of being interrupted or dismissed, but a deeper fury at what I'd allowed myself to become. I'd traded my dreams for security, my voice for peace, my identity for the illusion of partnership. But anger alone wasn't enough. I needed a plan, a way to reclaim not just Derek's respect, but my own sense of worth. I had no idea that fate was about to provide an opportunity more dramatic than anything I could have planned myself. The next evening, Derek announced that we'd been invited to his mother's annual charity gala, a black tie affair that served as both a fundraiser for local causes and a networking opportunity for Austin's real estate elite. It was exactly the kind of event where I'd learned to smile, nod, and blend into the elegant background, while the important people conducted important business. Mom specifically requested that you wear something conservative, Derek mentioned while adjusting his cufflinks. She thinks the dress you wore to the Morrisons' anniversary party was a bit too attention-grabbing.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I looked down at my outfit choices, all carefully selected to meet Patricia's unspoken but clearly communicated standards for appropriate dress. Nothing too bold, nothing too fashionable, nothing that might distract from Derek's professional image. I was tired of being a carefully managed reflection of someone else's taste. What if I wore something I actually liked for once? Derek's laugh was indulgent rather than amused. Come on, Nat. This isn't the time to make a statement. There'll be major investors there, people who could make or break the Riverside project. We need to present a united, professional front. And apparently that means I need to dress like your mother's idea of the perfect wife. It means you need to dress appropriately for the occasion. Is that really too much to ask? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with 3 years of accumulated resentment and unspoken expectations. Was it too much to ask that I suppress my personality, my preferences, my individuality in service of Derek's ambitions? Was it too much to ask that I become a supporting character in my own life? I chose a navy blue dress that Patricia would approve of, styled my hair in the conservative updo that Derek preferred, and prepared to spend another evening being invisible. I had no way of knowing that this particular night would shatter the careful facade we'd built around our marriage, or that the rain falling outside would wash away everything I thought I knew about my life. The evening started, like so many others, with Derek working the room while I exchanged pleasantries with familiar faces. I watched him charm potential investors, his confidence and charisma on full display, as he discussed market opportunities and development timelines. This was Derek at his best, and I felt a familiar pang of pride mixed with something that might have been grief for what we used to be. Patricia held court near the silent auction display, surrounded by Austin's social elite, as she discussed her latest philanthropic initiatives. She'd built her empire through a combination of shrewd business sense and strategic relationship management, and events like this showcased both skills perfectly. I watched her and wondered if I'd ever have the chance to build something meaningful of my own, or if I'd always be relegated to admiring other people's accomplishments from a respectful distance. The evening took an unexpected turn when Derek approached me near the dessert table, his expression tense with barely controlled frustration. "We need to leave," he said quietly, his hand gripping my elbow with uncomfortable pressure. "Is everything all right? Did something happen with the investors?" "Just get your coat. I'll explain in the car." The drive started in silence, Derek's jaw clenched as he navigated through Austin's evening traffic. I waited for an explanation, watching familiar landmarks pass by in the darkness. Finally, as we merged onto the highway, heading toward our neighborhood, Derek's composure cracked. Morrison pulled out of the Riverside project. The words hit like a physical blow. Harold Morrison was Derek's primary investor, the financial backbone that would make his ambitious development possible. Without Morrison's backing, months of planning and preparation would collapse. What happened? I thought the presentation went well last week. Apparently, his wife had concerns about the project's environmental impact. Some nonsense about wetland preservation and traffic patterns. Derek's voice was bitter with frustration. 3 months of work down the drain because Helen Morrison decided to play environmental activist. Maybe there's another way to structure the deal. What about bringing in additional investors to reduce Morrison's exposure? Derek's laugh was harsh. You think I haven't thought of that? You think Mom and I haven't been working every angle for weeks? This isn't a problem that gets solved with good intentions and optimistic thinking. The dismissal stung, but I tried again. What about the research I did on comparable projects? Some of those developments found creative solutions to environmental concerns. Natalie, please, just let me think. We drove in silence for another 20 minutes, the weight of Derek's failure settling between us like a physical presence. I wanted to comfort him, to find some way to help, but every attempt at conversation was met with terse responses or frustrated sighs. By the time we stopped for gas at a highway rest station, the atmosphere in the car had become suffocating. Derek pulled up to the pump and got out without a word, his movements sharp with suppressed anger. I watched him through the windshield as he filled the tank, his shoulders rigid with tension. When he finished, instead of getting back in the car, he walked toward the convenience store. I waited. 5 minutes became 10, then 15. Other cars came and went while I sat in the passenger seat, wondering what was taking so long. Finally, I got out to look for Derek, my heels clicking on the wet pavement as a light rain began to fall. I found him inside the store, not shopping but standing in the snack aisle with his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low but audible. I know, Mom. I know I screwed up. The Morrison deal was supposed to be locked down weeks ago. He paused, listening to Patricia's response. No, she doesn't understand the complexity of the situation. She keeps trying to offer suggestions like, this is some college project she can research her way out of. The words froze me in place behind a display of travel-sized toiletries. He was talking about me, reducing my attempts to help to naive meddling. I need space to think, to figure out how to salvage this mess without her constantly offering input I didn't ask for. Another pause. You're right. Maybe a few days apart would give me the clarity I need. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding as the implications became clear. Derek wasn't just frustrated about the failed deal. He was frustrated with me, with my presence, with my attempts to be helpful. The rain was falling harder when I reached the car, and I stood beside it uncertain whether to get back in or confront Derek about what I'd overheard. The decision was made for me when Derek emerged from the store, walked directly to the driver's side, and got in without looking at me. I hurried to the passenger door, but as I reached for the handle, I heard the engine start. Derek? I called through the window, but he was already putting the car in reverse. I stood in the rain, watching in disbelief as my husband of 3 years drove away from the gas station without me. The red taillights disappeared into the darkness, leaving me stranded 60 miles from home with nothing but my purse and the clothes on my back. The rain soaked through my conservative navy dress as I stood there trying to process what had just happened. Derek had abandoned me. Actually abandoned me at a highway rest stop in the middle of a storm, choosing his mother's advice over his wife's presence, choosing solitude over partnership, choosing cruelty over basic human decency. For a moment, I felt the familiar urge to make excuses for him, to find reasonable explanations for the unreasonable. He was stressed about the business deal. He needed space to think. He probably assumed I'd find my own way home and didn't mean for it to seem so harsh. But as I stood there in the rain, something fundamental shifted inside me. The woman who would have made those excuses, who would have called a cab and apologized for causing problems, who would have absorbed Derek's cruelty and transformed it into her own fault, felt suddenly foreign to me. Instead, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. This was Derek showing me exactly how much my presence meant to him, exactly how much my partnership was worth, exactly how little my feelings mattered when they conflicted with his needs. I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers, water droplets making the screen difficult to read. I could call a rideshare service, or my friend Brooklyn who lived in Austin, or even Patricia Harper who would probably lecture me about being more understanding of Derek's pressure while arranging transportation home. Instead, I found myself scrolling through my contacts to a number I'd saved months ago, but never used. Marcus Chen, the security consultant who'd spoken at one of Patricia's charity events about personal protection services for high-profile individuals. We talked briefly about his transition from military service to private security, and he'd given me his card with the casual comment that I should call if I ever needed anything. At the time, I'd thought it was just politeness, the kind of throwaway offer people make at social events. But something about Marcus had seemed genuine, solid in a way that felt rare in Derek's world of superficial networking and strategic relationships. My fingers hesitated over his contact information. What exactly was I planning to say? That my husband had abandoned me at a gas station and I needed a ride home? That my marriage was falling apart and I was standing in the rain questioning every choice I'd made in the past 3 years? Before I could overthink it further, I pressed call. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. Natalie? Is everything all right? The genuine concern in his voice nearly broke my resolve. When was the last time someone had asked if I was all right and actually waited for an honest answer? I'm stranded at a rest stop on Highway 71, I heard myself say. My husband. There was an argument and he left without me. I know it's late and I hate to impose, but I didn't know who else to call. Text me your exact location. I'll be there in 30 minutes. No questions about what kind of argument would lead to abandonment at a gas station. No requests for explanation or justification. Just immediate practical help offered without judgment. As I sent him my location and waited under the overhang by the convenience store entrance, I realized that this moment would divide my life into before and after. Before, when I'd been content to be Derek's carefully managed wife, accepting diminishment as the price of security. And after, when I'd begun to remember who I used to be and started wondering who I might become. The black SUV that pulled into the rest stop 30 minutes later looked like something from a movie. Sleek, imposing, with tinted windows that reflected the harsh, fluorescent lights of the gas station. When Marcus stepped out, I was struck again by the quiet confidence that had impressed me at the charity event. Tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the controlled precision of someone trained for combat, he surveyed the area with professional awareness before approaching me. Natalie, he said simply, his voice carrying neither pity nor judgment. Rough night? I managed a weak smile, suddenly conscious of how I must look. My carefully styled hair hung in damp strands around my face. My navy dress clung uncomfortably to my rain-soaked skin, and my makeup had probably run in spectacular fashion. That's one way to put it. Marcus opened the passenger door of his vehicle, waiting while I gathered what remained of my dignity and climbed inside. The interior was immaculate, all black leather and high-tech equipment that spoke of serious money and serious purpose. As he started the engine, classical music played softly from speakers I couldn't locate. Where to? He asked, adjusting the temperature controls without being asked. I gave him my address, then settled back into the heated seat as we pulled onto the highway. The warmth began to penetrate my chilled skin, and for the first time in hours, I felt my body begin to relax. We drove in comfortable silence for several miles before Marcus spoke again. I'm not going to ask what happened unless you want to talk about it, he said, his eyes focused on the road ahead. But I will say this. Any man who leaves his wife stranded at a gas station in the rain isn't worth the energy it takes to worry about him. The simple statement hit me harder than any elaborate sympathy would have. Marcus had summarized the situation with brutal clarity, cutting through all the rationalizations and excuses I'd been preparing. Derek wasn't worth worrying about. The revelation felt both obvious and revolutionary. He's been under a lot of stress with work, I heard myself say, the automatic defense rising before I could stop it. Marcus glanced at me briefly, his expression unreadable. Stress doesn't excuse cruelty. It reveals character. The words settled into the silence between us, impossible to argue with or dismiss. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for Derek's behavior, all the ways I'd justified his treatment of me as products of external pressure rather than deliberate choices. How many times had I convinced myself that his dismissiveness was temporary, that his respect for me would return once his business stabilized, once his mother approved of me, once the circumstances aligned properly. You're right, I said quietly, surprised by my own admission. I've been making excuses for him for years. Marcus nodded, but didn't push for elaboration. Instead, he reached into the center console and handed me a bottle of water and a package of tissues. Small gestures, but they demonstrated more consideration than Derek had shown me all evening. As we continued toward Austin, I found myself talking, not about Derek specifically, but about the gradual erosion of my sense of self, the way I'd slowly learned to expect less and settle for diminishment disguised as love. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed he was truly paying attention. I used to have plans, I told him as we passed familiar exit signs. I wanted to start my own consulting firm, help businesses develop sustainable growth strategies. I had this whole vision of building something meaningful, something that would make a real difference. What stopped you? The question was simple, but it forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding. Fear, I guess. Fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, fear of disappointing Derek by pursuing something that might take time away from supporting his career. Whose fear? Marcus asked. Yours, or fear that was taught to you? I turned to stare at him, struck by the insight. When had I started being afraid of failure? In college, I'd thrived on challenges, tackled difficult projects with enthusiasm and confidence. The fear had come later, gradually instilled through 1,000 small interactions that taught me to doubt my capabilities and defer to others' judgment. I think, I said slowly, it was taught to me. Marcus pulled into my driveway as the dashboard clock showed nearly midnight. Derek's BMW was nowhere to be seen, and the house stood dark and empty. He walked me to the front door, waiting while I fumbled with my keys, my hands still shaking slightly from cold and adrenaline. Thank you, I said as the door opened. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't answered. You would have figured something out, Marcus replied confidently. You're stronger than you think you are, Natalie. Tonight proved that. How did tonight prove anything except that my husband finds me disposable? Marcus studied my face in the porch light. Because when faced with abandonment and humiliation, you didn't break down. You didn't call someone to fix the situation or make excuses for what happened. You took action to help yourself. That's not the behavior of someone who's weak or dependent. After he left, I stood in my empty house and tried to process the events of the evening. The familiar surroundings felt suddenly foreign, as if I were seeing them through new eyes. The perfectly coordinated furniture that Derek and Patricia had selected, the artwork chosen to complement the color scheme rather than reflect personal taste, the complete absence of anything that spoke to my individual preferences or interests. I walked through rooms that felt like a magazine spread rather than a home, noting how little of my personality was reflected in our shared space. Even my home office had been gradually converted into Derek's secondary workspace, my business books replaced by his architectural plans and development proposals. In the bathroom, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The careful styling had been washed away by rain and stress, revealing features that looked unfamiliar without their usual polished presentation. But for the first time in years, I looked real rather than artificially perfect. I changed into comfortable clothes that Derek considered too casual for public appearances, made a cup of tea that Patricia would have deemed too caffeinated for evening consumption, and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen. If I was going to rebuild my life, I needed to understand what that life might look like. The first list I made was titled, Things I've Stopped Doing. It was longer than I'd expected. I'd stopped reading books that Derek found impractical. I'd stopped expressing opinions that might contradict his or his mother's perspectives. I'd stopped wearing clothes that made me feel confident if they didn't fit Patricia's definition of appropriate. I'd stopped pursuing friendships that Derek found uninteresting or potentially problematic for his image. The second list was things I want to try. This one started slowly, but as I wrote, ideas began flowing faster than I could capture them. Learning Spanish, traveling solo to places that interested me rather than locations selected for networking opportunities, taking cooking classes focused on cuisines I enjoyed rather than entertaining Derek's business associates, reading everything I could about sustainable business practices and environmental consulting. The third list was the most important. Skills I have that nobody acknowledges. My business education, my research abilities, my talent for identifying market trends and organizational inefficiencies, my natural aptitude for strategic planning, all the capabilities I developed in college and continued to refine privately, even as Derek and Patricia dismissed them as irrelevant hobbies. By 3 a.m, I had filled 12 pages with plans, ideas, and revelations. The woman who emerged from that late-night self-examination was someone I hadn't seen in years. Ambitious, intelligent, capable of independent thought and action. She felt familiar yet distant, like recognizing a childhood friend after decades apart. Derek came home the next afternoon, entering through the garage as if returning from a normal day at the office, rather than abandoning his wife at a highway rest stop. I was in the kitchen, researching graduate programs in environmental business consulting on my laptop, when I heard his footsteps. "Hey," he said casually, as if nothing had happened. "Sorry about last night. I drove around for a while to clear my head, then crashed at Mom's place. I figured you'd find a way home." The apology was perfunctory, designed to close the conversation, rather than address the harm he'd caused. The Derek I'd married would have been horrified by his own behavior, would have spent the entire drive back planning elaborate gestures of remorse and reconciliation. This Derek simply expected me to absorb his cruelty and move forward without discussion. "You left me stranded at a gas station in the rain," I said without looking up from my laptop. "Come on, Nat. Don't be dramatic. You had your phone, you had money. It's not like I left you completely helpless." The casual dismissal of my experience, the reduction of abandonment and humiliation to mere inconvenience, crystallized everything I'd realized during my night of reflection. Derek didn't see me as a partner deserving of respect and consideration. He saw me as a problem to be managed, an accessory that occasionally required maintenance. "How did you get home?" he asked, opening the refrigerator and scanning its contents as if the answer were merely curious rather than crucial. "Marcus Chen picked me up." Derek's hand froze on a bottle of water. Marcus Chen? The security guy from Mom's charity thing? He was the only person I could think of who might actually answer his phone and help without asking a dozen questions first. Derek's expression shifted from casual indifference to something approaching concern, but not for my well-being. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That my husband abandoned me at a rest stop and I needed a ride home." "Jesus, Natalie, do you have any idea how that makes me look?" "Mom's been trying to build a relationship with Chen's company for months. They provide security for half the major developments in Texas." And there it was. Not embarrassment about his behavior, not concern for how I'd felt standing alone in the rain, not remorse for the cruelty he'd displayed. Just worry about how his actions might affect his business prospects and his mother's networking strategies. "How it makes you look." I closed my laptop slowly, giving Derek my full attention for the first time in months. "You left your wife stranded at a gas station in a storm, and your primary concern is your professional image?" "Look, I said I was sorry, but calling Chen was a mistake. Now there's going to be gossip in circles where Mom's trying to establish credibility. Then you probably shouldn't have abandoned me in the first place." Derek's jaw tightened with familiar irritation. I needed space to think. The Morrison deal fell through, and I couldn't handle you trying to fix everything with your college research and optimistic suggestions. Sometimes problems are more complicated than you understand. "And sometimes," I said quietly, "the person you dismiss as incapable of understanding complex problems is the one who sees solutions you're too proud to consider." For a moment, Derek looked genuinely surprised by my response. In the past, confrontations like this would have ended with me apologizing for causing additional stress, promising to be more supportive and less intrusive. The woman who spoke calmly and held her ground was someone he didn't recognize. "We need to talk about what happened with Chen," Derek said, shifting tactics. "Mom thinks I should call him personally, explain that you were upset, and maybe not thinking clearly when you reached out. You want to call the man who helped me and suggest that I was having some kind of breakdown? I want to do damage control before this affects our reputation in the industry." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but I barely heard Derek's words. I was thinking about Marcus's observation that stress reveals character, rather than creating it. Derek's reaction to crisis, to failure, to inconvenience, was to blame others and protect his image, rather than take responsibility or show genuine concern for the people affected by his choices. That evening, Derek left for another meeting with Patricia to discuss salvaging the Morrison project or finding alternative investors. I used the time alone to make phone calls I'd been postponing for years. The first was to Brooklyn Hayes, my college roommate who'd moved to Miami after graduation and built a successful career in environmental consulting. We'd exchanged holiday cards and occasional social media comments, but Derek had gradually discouraged a deeper friendship, claiming that Brooklyn's liberal politics and unconventional lifestyle choices made her a poor influence. "Natalie!" Brooklyn's voice carried genuine excitement. "I was just thinking about you. How are things in Austin?" For the first time in years, I answered honestly. I told her about the gradual erosion of my ambitions, about Derek's systematic dismissal of my capabilities, about the previous night's abandonment and the clarity it had brought. Brooklyn listened without judgment, occasionally interjecting with colorful commentary about Derek's character that made me laugh despite everything. "You know," Brooklyn said thoughtfully, "my firm is expanding rapidly. We're looking for someone with strong research skills and business background to help develop our client acquisition strategy. The pay wouldn't match what Derek provides, but it would be a start, a way to rebuild your professional credentials." The offer was tempting, but Miami felt impossibly far from everything I knew. "I don't know if I'm ready for such a dramatic change." "Think about it," Brooklyn urged. "You're brilliant, Natalie. You always were. You just need to remember that about yourself." The second call was to Grace Harper, Derek's younger sister, who'd always treated me with genuine warmth, despite Patricia's obvious disapproval. Grace was finishing her medical residency in Dallas, too busy with her own demanding career to get involved in family politics. But she'd always been kind to me in ways that suggested she saw through her mother's manipulations. "Natalie, what a nice surprise," Grace said when she answered. "How are you holding up? Derek mentioned the Morrison deal fell through." "Actually, I'm calling about something else. Grace, can I ask you something directly? What does your family really think of me?" There was a long pause before Grace answered. "Honestly, Mom thinks you're not ambitious enough for Derek. She believes he needs someone who'll push him harder, challenge him more professionally. And Derek loves you, but he's never learned to value anything Mom doesn't approve of. He sees you through her eyes instead of his own." The conversation with Grace confirmed what I'd suspected, but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Patricia had never intended to accept me as Derek's partner, and Derek had never developed the strength to choose his wife over his mother's preferences. I was fighting for respect in a system designed to ensure I'd never receive it. Over the following week, Derek threw himself into salvaging his business prospects, while I quietly began building an exit strategy. I researched apartments in Miami, updated my resume for the first time in 3 years, and reached out to former professors for references. Each small step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd thought was permanently lost. The hardest part was recognizing how completely I'd surrendered my independence. I had no individual credit cards, no separate bank accounts, no professional network independent of Derek's connections. Patricia had suggested these arrangements as practical ways to simplify our finances and present a united front to business associates. I'd agreed, not realizing I was systematically eliminating my ability to leave. Marcus called unexpectedly on Thursday evening, while Derek was at another crisis meeting with potential investors. I'd been researching business loans for women entrepreneurs, trying to understand how I might eventually fund my own consulting practice. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Marcus said. "I wanted to check in, see how you're doing after the other night." "I'm doing better than I expected," I admitted, clearer about some things that have been confusing me for a long time. "Good. That's usually how it works when people stop making excuses for other people's bad behavior." We talked for nearly an hour about everything except Derek. Marcus told me about his transition from military service to private security, about building his business from a single client to a team of 12 specialists, providing protection for executives, celebrities, and high-profile individuals throughout Texas. His success story was inspiring, but what struck me most was how he'd built something meaningful while maintaining his integrity. "I should let you go," Marcus said eventually. "But Natalie, if you ever need anything at all, don't hesitate to call. Professional or personal, doesn't matter." After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen, thinking about the contrast between Marcus's unconditional offer of support and Derek's conditional love that depended on my willingness to remain small and manageable. One man saw me as someone worth helping, the other saw me as someone who needed to be controlled. The final revelation came during Derek's birthday party, an elaborate affair that Patricia organized to celebrate her son while networking with potential investors who might replace Morrison's funding. I spent the evening watching Derek charm guests, while his mother orchestrated conversations designed to rebuild his professional reputation. I was refilling the appetizer trays in the kitchen when I overheard Patricia talking to one of Derek's business associates about the challenges of the past month. Derek's been under tremendous stress since the Morrison project collapsed, Patricia was saying. It's been difficult for Natalie too, of course. She's not really equipped to understand the complexities of development financing, so she can't provide the kind of support Derek needs during crises like this. Perhaps she could take some business courses, the associate suggested diplomatically. Patricia's laugh was tinkling and dismissive. Natalie has a business degree, actually, but there's a difference between academic knowledge and practical experience. Derek needs a partner who can contribute meaningfully to strategic decisions, not just moral support. The words were delivered with Patricia's characteristic blend of sweetness and condescension, designed to sound supportive while systematically undermining my credibility. But what shocked me wasn't the content of her criticism. It was Derek's response. "Mom's right," Derek said, his voice carrying clearly into the kitchen. "Nat tries to help, but she doesn't understand the real-world applications. I need someone who can match my level of sophistication when it comes to complex business decisions. Someone who can match my level of sophistication." The phrase echoed in my mind as I set down the serving tray with shaking hands. Derek wasn't just agreeing with his mother's assessment. He was actively participating in the demolition of my credibility, dismissing my education and abilities to justify his treatment of me. I walked out of that party without saying goodbye to anyone, driving to a hotel near the airport where I spent the night researching flights to Miami and apartments I could afford on an entry-level consulting salary. By morning, I had a plan that felt both terrifying and liberating. The woman who'd been abandoned at a gas station 10 days earlier would have returned home to apologize for leaving the party early, would have absorbed Derek's criticism as accurate assessment rather than calculated cruelty. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who remembered what it felt like to value herself. When Derek called the next morning, demanding to know why I'd disappeared from his birthday party, I gave him an answer that surprised us both. Because I realized I don't want to spend another minute of my life in rooms where people who claim to love me systematically tear down my worth. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about Derek's capacity for genuine remorse or change. He hadn't called to apologize or explain. He'd called to manage my behavior, to ensure I'd continue playing my assigned role without disrupting his carefully constructed image. That afternoon, while Derek was at the office trying to salvage his reputation and his business prospects, I began packing. Not everything, just the essentials I'd need for a fresh start in Miami. My clothes that reflected my actual taste rather than Patricia's preferences. My books that Derek considered impractical. My mother's jewelry that he'd suggested I keep in a safety deposit box to avoid the appearance of ostentation. 3 days later, I would board a plane to Miami with 2 suitcases and a bank account containing the small inheritance from my grandmother that I'd kept separate from our joint finances. Derek would come home to find a letter explaining my decision to pursue opportunities that valued my capabilities rather than dismiss them. But that night, as I folded clothes that hadn't seen daylight in months because Derek preferred me in more conservative styles, I felt something I hadn't experienced since college. Excitement about my own future. For the first time in years, I was moving towards something I wanted rather than away from something that hurt me. The woman Derek had abandoned at that gas station was gone forever. In her place was someone who remembered her own worth, someone who refused to accept diminishment as the price of love, someone who was finally ready to build a life that reflected her true potential rather than other people's limited expectations. I had no idea that leaving Derek would be just the beginning of discovering who I really was, or that Marcus Chen would play a far more significant role in that discovery than either of us could have imagined. All I knew was that for the first time in years, I was choosing myself over everyone else's comfort, and that choice felt like coming home to a person I'd almost forgotten existed. Miami hit me like a wall of humid air and possibility when I stepped off the plane at noon on a Tuesday in October. The terminal buzzed with conversations in Spanish and English, the energy completely different from Austin's controlled corporate atmosphere. I collected my 2 suitcases and took a taxi to the small furnished apartment Brooklyn had helped me secure in Coral Gables, watching palm trees and Art Deco buildings pass by the window, as I tried to convince myself I'd made the right choice. The apartment was a studio on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades, but it was mine. Completely mine, paid for with money I'd earned and saved independently. The furniture was basic but functional, and the large window overlooked a courtyard where elderly Cuban men played dominoes under a ficus tree. It wasn't the suburban perfection Derek and Patricia had curated, but it felt authentic in a way that house never had. Brooklyn arrived that evening with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine, her dark hair streaked with purple highlights that would have horrified Patricia. She looked exactly like the college friend I remembered, confident and unapologetically herself in ways I'd forgotten were possible. "So," Brooklyn said, settling cross-legged on my small couch with a container of lo mein, "tell me everything. Start from the gas station, and don't leave out any details." I found myself laughing for the first time in weeks as I described Derek's face when I'd mentioned Marcus picking me up, Patricia's horror at my dramatic departure from the birthday party, and the careful planning that had gone into my escape. Brooklyn listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that sometimes leaving everything behind was the only way to save yourself. "I'm proud of you," Brooklyn said when I finished. The Natalie I knew in college was ambitious and fearless. I've been waiting years for her to come back. I feel like I'm starting from zero. No professional network, no local connections, no idea what I'm actually capable of outside of Derek's world. "That's not starting from zero," Brooklyn corrected. "That's starting fresh. There's a difference. You have skills, education, and experience that Derek never let you use. Now you get to find out what you can build with them." The next morning, I walked into Eco Consult Solutions, Brooklyn's environmental consulting firm, wearing a navy blazer I'd bought specifically for job interviews, and carrying a portfolio of business plans I'd developed during my marriage but never implemented. The office occupied 2 floors of a converted warehouse in Wynwood, all exposed brick and industrial lighting that somehow managed to feel both professional and creative. Brooklyn introduced me to her business partner, Alexander Reeves, a former EPA administrator who'd left government service to pursue private sector environmental consulting. Alex was in his 50s, with gray streaked hair and the kind of thoughtful intensity that suggested he'd spent years navigating complex bureaucratic challenges. "Brooklyn tells me you're interested in client development and strategic planning," Alex said, gesturing for me to sit in his office overlooking the Miami River. "Walk me through your background." I'd rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, but sitting across from someone who was actually listening to my qualifications rather than dismissing them felt surreal. I explained my business education, my research into sustainable development practices, my analysis of market trends that Derek had never bothered to review. Alex asked detailed questions about my methodology, my sources, my conclusions about emerging opportunities in environmental consulting. "Your research on renewable energy financing is particularly interesting," Alex said, flipping through my portfolio. "These are insights that took our team months to develop, and you've reached similar conclusions through independent analysis. I've been following environmental business trends for years, but I've never had the opportunity to apply my research professionally. Why not?" The question hung in the air, simple but loaded with implications. I could have offered diplomatic explanations about timing and circumstances, but something about Alex's direct approach encouraged honesty. Because my ex-husband and his family convinced me that my ideas weren't sophisticated enough for real-world application, I started believing them. Alex nodded, as if this explanation made perfect sense. One of the biggest challenges in this industry is helping clients overcome preconceived notions about what environmental consulting can accomplish. People often dismiss solutions before they understand them fully. It sounds like you have personal experience with that dynamic. The job he offered me wasn't glamorous. Junior consultant focused on market research and client outreach, with opportunities to develop strategic proposals if I proved myself capable. The salary was less than half what Derek had provided, but it came with something I'd never had: respect for my contributions, and room for professional growth. My first project involved researching potential clients for EcoConsult's expansion into sustainable tourism consulting. I spent days analyzing resort development projects, identifying properties that might benefit from environmental efficiency audits, and developing outreach strategies targeted at executives who were beginning to understand the business value of sustainability initiatives. The work was challenging in ways I'd forgotten I enjoyed. Instead of arranging Derek's schedule and managing his social obligations, I was solving problems that required analytical thinking and creative solutions. Instead of supporting someone else's ambitions, I was building expertise that belonged entirely to me. Alex became an unexpected mentor, reviewing my research with the kind of attention to detail that revealed genuine investment in my success. He challenged my assumptions, asked probing questions about my conclusions, and gradually began including me in client meetings where my insights could contribute to strategic discussions. "You have instincts for this work that can't be taught," Alex told me after a particularly successful presentation to a hotel chain considering energy efficiency upgrades. "You understand how to translate environmental benefits into business language without losing the substance of what we're proposing." The compliment meant more than he could have known. For years, Derek and Patricia had dismissed my ability to understand complex business relationships. Having someone recognize my strategic thinking as valuable rather than naive felt like vindication of everything I'd believed about my own capabilities. Brooklyn became my guide to Miami's social landscape, introducing me to a circle of young professionals who'd built careers based on passion rather than traditional networking. We attended art gallery openings in Wynwood, salsa dancing lessons in Little Havana, and beach volleyball games on Key Biscayne, where conversations focused on travel plans and creative projects, rather than business deals and social climbing. "You're different here," Brooklyn observed one evening as we shared tapas at a restaurant overlooking Biscayne Bay. "More relaxed, more yourself." "I feel like I'm remembering who I used to be," I admitted, "or maybe discovering who I could have been all along." The transformation wasn't just professional. Living alone for the first time since college, I began making choices based purely on my own preferences. I painted my apartment walls in colors that made me happy, bought art from local galleries that spoke to me rather than complemented a decorating scheme, learned to cook foods I enjoyed rather than dishes that impressed dinner party guests. I also started exercising again, not to maintain an appearance that met Patricia's standards for Derek's wife, but because I missed the physical confidence I'd felt in college. I joined a gym near my apartment and discovered kickboxing classes that channeled years of suppressed frustration into something powerful and constructive. Marcus had stayed in touch through occasional text messages, checking in with the casual consistency of someone who genuinely cared about my well-being without expecting anything in return. When he mentioned a business trip to Miami in November, I surprised myself by suggesting we meet for dinner. The restaurant I chose reflected my growing confidence in my own taste. A small Cuban place in Coral Gables, where the food was exceptional but the atmosphere was unpretentious. Marcus arrived exactly on time, wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt that somehow looked more elegant than Derek's expensive suits ever had. "You look happy," Marcus said as we settled into our table. "Miami agrees with you." "Miami doesn't try to change me into someone else's ideal version of myself," I replied. "That makes happiness a lot easier." Over dinner, I told him about my work at EcoConsult, about the clients I was developing and the projects I was contributing to in meaningful ways. Marcus listened with the same focused attention he'd shown during our drive from the gas station, asking questions that demonstrated genuine interest in my professional development. "What's been the biggest surprise about starting over?" Marcus asked as we shared flan for dessert. How much I'd forgotten about what I was actually good at. For years, I believed Derek's assessment that my skills weren't sophisticated enough for real business applications. But it turns out I'm actually quite good at identifying market opportunities and developing strategic approaches to complex problems. "Derek was wrong about a lot of things," Marcus said quietly, "but especially about you." The conversation shifted to Marcus's work, and I learned details about his business that revealed both its scope and his integrity. Chen Security Solutions provided protection for executives whose work put them at risk, celebrities dealing with stalkers, and families facing credible threats. But Marcus had built his company with principles that went beyond profit. His team included several veterans transitioning to civilian careers, and he regularly donated services to domestic violence organizations helping women escape dangerous situations. Most security work is about preventing problems before they develop, Marcus explained. But sometimes it's about helping people rebuild their lives after someone has tried to destroy them. Those are the cases that matter most to me. The words resonated with my own experience of rebuilding after systematic destruction. Marcus understood that healing from psychological abuse was as important as protection from physical threats, that helping someone reclaim their sense of safety often meant helping them remember their own strength. When Marcus walked me to my car after dinner, neither of us addressed the obvious attraction that had been building throughout the evening. He was clearly interested, and I was drawn to his quiet confidence and genuine respect for my independence. But I also knew I wasn't ready for romantic involvement with anyone, regardless of how appealing the possibility might be. "I'd like to see you again when I'm in Miami," Marcus said as I unlocked my car door. "I'd like that too," I admitted. "But Marcus, I need you to know that I'm not ready for anything complicated. I'm still figuring out who I am outside of my marriage." Marcus smiled, and I caught a glimpse of the warmth that he usually kept carefully controlled. "Natalie, I've been watching you discover your own strength for months now. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not pushing for anything you're not ready to give. But I am hoping you'll keep me updated on your progress." After he left, I sat in my car for several minutes, processing the difference between Marcus's patient interest and Derek's possessive demands. Derek had wanted to own me, to shape me into his ideal partner, regardless of what that cost my sense of self. Marcus seemed content to know me as I actually was, supporting my growth without trying to direct it. Work continued to challenge me in the best possible ways. Alex assigned me to lead the research for a major project with a luxury resort chain that was considering comprehensive sustainability retrofits for their Caribbean properties. The scope was enormous, analyzing energy usage patterns, water conservation opportunities, waste reduction strategies, and guest experience implications across 12 different locations. I threw myself into the project with enthusiasm I hadn't felt for work in years. I spent days reviewing utility data, interviewing property managers, and developing cost-benefit analyses that translated environmental improvements into specific financial projections. The research required exactly the kind of strategic thinking and analytical skills I'd developed in college but never been able to apply professionally. The breakthrough came when I identified a pattern in guest satisfaction surveys that nobody else had noticed. Properties that had implemented even minor sustainability initiatives showed measurably higher ratings for overall experience, suggesting that environmental consciousness was becoming a significant factor in luxury travel decisions. "This changes everything about how we approach the proposal," Brooklyn said when I presented my findings to the team. "Instead of selling environmental retrofits as cost-saving measures, we're positioning them as competitive advantages that directly impact revenue." Alex agreed to let me present this section of our proposal directly to the client, a level of responsibility I'd never been offered in Derek's world. The presentation was scheduled for December, giving me 6 weeks to refine my analysis and prepare for the kind of high-stakes meeting that would have terrified me just months earlier. The preparation consumed my evenings and weekends, but unlike the social obligations Derek had required, this work felt meaningful. I was building something valuable, contributing expertise that nobody else could replicate, creating solutions that would have real environmental and economic impact. Marcus returned to Miami in early December, ostensibly for a security consultation with a tech executive who'd received threatening communications from a former business partner. But he also made time for dinner with me, choosing a seafood restaurant on South Beach where we could walk along the ocean afterward. "You seem different," Marcus observed as we strolled along the sand, both of us carrying our shoes and letting the waves wash over our feet. "More confident, more settled in yourself." "I'm presenting to a major client next week," I told him. 6 months ago, Derek wouldn't have trusted me to order lunch for his business meetings. Now I'm leading strategic development for a project worth potentially millions in revenue. How does that feel? Terrifying and exhilarating and exactly right, I laughed. Like I'm finally doing what I was meant to do all along. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face me in the moonlight. "Natalie, can I tell you something I should have said months ago?" I nodded, suddenly nervous about what he might reveal. When you called me that night from the gas station, I knew Derek was an idiot for not recognizing what he had. But watching you build this new life, seeing you discover your own capabilities and pursue work that challenges you, I'm grateful he was too blind to appreciate you. Because if he hadn't been, you might never have become the woman you are now. The words hit me with unexpected force, not because they were romantic declarations, but because they reflected a truth I was only beginning to understand myself. The pain Derek had caused, the systematic diminishment I'd endured, the humiliation of being abandoned in the rain, had all been necessary catalysts for discovering my own strength. I wouldn't have chosen that path, but I couldn't regret where it had led me. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for helping me that night, and for seeing something in me that I'd forgotten was there." "It was always there, Natalie. You just needed permission to show it." The presentation to the resort chain executives went better than I dared to hope. My analysis of the connection between sustainability initiatives and guest satisfaction provided the foundation for a comprehensive proposal that addressed both environmental and business objectives. The executives asked detailed questions about implementation timelines, cost projections, and measurement strategies, all of which I was able to answer with confidence based on months of thorough research. When they awarded EcoConsult the contract 2 weeks later, Alex called the entire team together to announce that my research had been the deciding factor in their decision. "This is the largest contract in the company's history," Alex said, raising his coffee mug in an impromptu toast. "And it happened because Natalie identified opportunities that nobody else in the industry was tracking. This is what happens when you give talented people the resources and respect they need to do their best work." The recognition felt surreal after years of having my contributions dismissed or ignored. But more than external validation, I felt a deep satisfaction in knowing I'd created something valuable through my own efforts and expertise. This success belonged entirely to me, earned through work that reflected my actual capabilities, rather than someone else's limited expectations. That evening, I called Grace Harper to share my news. Derek's sister had stayed in touch despite my divorce from her brother, maintaining a friendship that transcended family loyalty. She listened with genuine enthusiasm as I described the presentation and the contract award. "I'm so proud of you," Grace said when I finished. "You sound like the Natalie I met when Derek first introduced you, before Mom got involved and started managing your role in the family." "How is Derek handling the divorce?" I asked, curiosity finally overcoming my determination to avoid discussing my ex-husband. Grace paused before answering. "Honestly? Not well. The business is struggling without the Morrison deal, and he's having trouble finding investors who trust his judgment after several projects fell through. Mom keeps telling him he needs to find a wife who can contribute more strategically to his career development. He always did have trouble taking responsibility for his own failures. The funny thing is, he finally read some of the research you'd done on sustainable development trends. He mentioned that your analysis was actually quite sophisticated, but by then you were already gone." The conversation left me feeling oddly detached from Derek's struggles. The man who dismissed my capabilities and abandoned me at a gas station was finally recognizing my worth, but only after losing access to it permanently. There was poetry in that timing, but no satisfaction. I'd moved beyond needing Derek's validation to find peace with my own value. Christmas in Miami was unlike anything I'd experienced in Texas. Instead of elaborate family gatherings designed to showcase Patricia's social influence, I spent the holiday volunteering at a local environmental nonprofit that Brooklyn supported. We served meals to families affected by recent hurricane damage, and I found myself talking with people who'd lost everything but were focused on rebuilding rather than assigning blame for their circumstances. On New Year's Eve, Marcus flew down for the weekend, and we attended a party at Alexander's house overlooking the bay. The guests were an eclectic mix of environmental consultants, tech entrepreneurs, artists, and activists who'd chosen Miami for its energy rather than its traditional business opportunities. Conversations flowed between English and Spanish, covering everything from coral reef restoration to cryptocurrency investments to plans for sustainable urban development. At midnight, when the fireworks began exploding over the water, Marcus kissed me for the first time. It was gentle and patient, asking rather than demanding, offering rather than taking. When we broke apart, I realized That this was what partnership felt like when both people valued the other's independence as much as their connection. "Happy New Year, Natalie," Marcus said quietly, his hands still framing my face. "Happy New Year," I replied, thinking about how much my life had changed since the previous January, when I'd been Derek's carefully managed wife rather than my own person. The year ahead stretched before me, full of possibilities I was finally free to explore. I had work that challenged and fulfilled me, friendships based on genuine affection rather than social utility, and a growing relationship with someone who saw my strength as attractive rather than threatening. Most importantly, I had rediscovered my own capability to create the life I wanted rather than accepting the one others expected me to live. Standing on that balcony overlooking Biscayne Bay, surrounded by people who celebrated authenticity rather than conformity, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced during my marriage. This was what happiness looked like when it wasn't conditional on someone else's approval. When it was built on personal achievement rather than reflected glory. When it belonged entirely to me. 6 months later, I would be proven right about all of it. But I had no way of knowing that my contentment was about to be tested by the most challenging opportunity of my professional career, or that Marcus would play a crucial role in helping me navigate it. The call came on a Wednesday morning in March, while I was reviewing environmental impact assessments for a new client in the Bahamas. Alexander knocked on my office door with an expression I'd learned to recognize as barely contained excitement. "Natalie, I need you to drop everything and focus on this," Alex said, settling into the chair across from my desk with a thick folder. "I just received a request for proposal that could transform our entire business model." The folder contained preliminary information about Meridian Hospitality Group, a Texas-based corporation that owned luxury hotels and resorts throughout the southeastern United States. They were seeking comprehensive environmental consulting services for a complete sustainability overhaul of their operations, from energy systems to waste management to guest experience integration. "This is massive," I said, scanning the scope of work. "They're talking about retrofitting 37 properties across 8 states. "It gets better," Alex smiled. "They specifically requested our firm based on your research into guest satisfaction correlations with environmental initiatives. Apparently, your work on the Caribbean project has been circulating among hospitality executives as the definitive analysis of sustainability's impact on luxury travel markets. The project would require creating customized solutions for properties ranging from beach resorts to urban boutique hotels to mountain lodges, each with unique environmental challenges and operational constraints. The timeline was aggressive but manageable, and the potential revenue would allow EcoConsult to expand our team and take on projects we'd previously been too small to handle. I want you to lead this," Alex continued. "Full project management authority, your own research team, direct client interface. This is the kind of opportunity that defines careers." The responsibility was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. 18 months earlier, Derek had considered me incapable of meaningful contribution to business discussions. Now I was being offered leadership of a project that would establish EcoConsult as a major player in environmental consulting for the hospitality industry. "What about the Texas connection?" I asked, suddenly aware that Meridian's headquarters were located in Austin. "Do we know if they have any relationship with Harper Development?" Alex consulted his notes. "Meridian is primarily focused on hospitality properties, while Harper Development concentrates on residential and mixed-use projects. Different market segments. Minimal overlap. Why do you ask?" I explained my connection to Austin's development community through my ex-husband, emphasizing that while I didn't anticipate conflicts, transparency was important for managing potential complications. "Your personal history with Austin's business community could actually be an advantage," Alex observed. "You understand the local market dynamics and regulatory environment in ways that would take outside consultants months to develop." The irony wasn't lost on me. The very connections I'd developed as Derek's wife, the social network I'd been expected to maintain but never professionally utilize, now represented valuable expertise for my own career advancement. Assembling my research team proved easier than expected. Brooklyn eagerly accepted the role of senior environmental analyst, and Alex approved hiring 2 additional consultants with specialized expertise in hospitality operations and renewable energy systems. Within 2 weeks, we had established a dedicated workspace and begun the preliminary analysis that would form the foundation of our proposal. The research phase required extensive travel to Meridian properties throughout the Southeast, conducting site assessments and interviewing property managers about current operations and potential improvements. Each location presented unique challenges and opportunities, from historic buildings with preservation constraints to resort properties with complex water management systems. During a site visit to a Meridian resort in Savannah, I found myself analyzing guest flow patterns and energy usage with the kind of systematic approach that Derek had dismissed as academic rather than practical. But the property manager, a seasoned hospitality professional named Carmen Rodriguez, recognized the value immediately. "Nobody's ever looked at our operations this way before," Carmen said, as I explained how guest behavior patterns could inform more efficient lighting and climate control systems. "You're seeing connections between guest experience and environmental efficiency that we've never considered." The validation from industry professionals reinforced my growing confidence in my analytical abilities. These weren't theoretical academic exercises, but practical solutions that would improve both environmental impact and operational profitability. Marcus had been traveling extensively for his own business, but he made time for regular phone calls that provided emotional support during the intensive project development phase. His understanding of high-stakes business negotiations, combined with his genuine investment in my success, made him an invaluable sounding board for strategic decisions. "You're describing solutions that nobody else in the industry is offering," Marcus observed during one of our evening conversations. "That's not just consulting, that's innovation." "I'm nervous about the presentation," I admitted. "This is the largest potential client I've ever presented to, and the competition includes firms with decades more experience than EcoConsult." "Experience with old approaches to familiar problems," Marcus corrected. "You're offering fresh perspectives on challenges they've been struggling with for years. That's more valuable than experience that's taught people to accept limitations." The proposal document we submitted in early May was comprehensive, detailed, and unlike anything I'd ever produced during my marriage. Instead of supporting someone else's vision, I was articulating my own strategic approach to complex environmental challenges. The document represented months of research, analysis, and creative problem-solving that demonstrated capabilities I'd never been allowed to fully develop. Meridian's response came faster than expected. They wanted to schedule presentations with their top 3 consulting firms, with final selection expected by the end of May. Our presentation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at their Austin headquarters, requiring me to return to the city I'd left behind for the first time since my divorce. The prospect of returning to Austin created unexpected anxiety. Not about seeing Derek, whose presence in my life now felt like a closed chapter, but about confronting the physical spaces where I'd learned to minimize myself. The city represented a version of myself I'd outgrown, and I worried that being there might somehow diminish the confidence I'd developed in Miami. Brooklyn offered to accompany me for moral support, but I realized this was something I needed to do alone. Returning to Austin as a successful consultant leading my own team, presenting solutions to major corporate clients, would be the clearest demonstration of how completely I'd transformed my life. Marcus flew to Austin the night before my presentation, not to interfere with my professional responsibilities but to provide personal support during what we both recognized as a significant moment in my development. He booked a room at the same hotel where I was staying but respected my need to focus on final preparation without distraction. "How do you feel about being back?" Marcus asked over dinner at a restaurant downtown, carefully avoiding the neighborhoods where Derek and I had lived. "Strange," I admitted. "Like visiting a foreign country where I used to live but never really belonged." "That's probably accurate. You're not the same person who left here." The Meridian headquarters occupied a gleaming tower in Austin's financial district, all glass and steel that projected corporate sophistication. Arriving there in a tailored suit, I'd chosen to project competence rather than compliance. Carrying presentation materials that represented my own expertise rather than supporting someone else's agenda, I felt a profound sense of completion. The presentation room contained 8 Meridian executives, including CEO Jonathan Meridian and Chief Operating Officer Sandra Liu, both of whom had reputations as demanding but fair evaluators of business proposals. My team included Brooklyn, Alex, and our renewable energy specialist, but I would be delivering the primary presentation and fielding the majority of questions. Ms. Harper, CEO Meridian began, then paused. I apologize, I have Harper here, but I believe you've recently changed your name? Reynolds, I corrected smoothly. Natalie Reynolds. I've returned to my maiden name following my divorce. The clarification was minor, but symbolically important. I was presenting as myself, not as Derek's ex-wife or anyone else's definition of who I should be. The presentation went flawlessly. I walked them through our comprehensive analysis of their properties, demonstrated the financial impact of our proposed improvements, and outlined implementation strategies that addressed both environmental objectives and operational realities. The executives asked probing questions about cost projections, timeline feasibility, and measurement protocols, all of which I answered with confidence based on months of thorough research. The breakthrough moment came when Sandra Liu asked about guest experience implications of our proposed changes. This was where my research into the psychology of luxury travel preferences gave us a decisive advantage over competitors who focused solely on technical environmental improvements. Traditional environmental consulting treats sustainability as a cost center that needs to be managed, I explained, pulling up data visualizations that demonstrated guest satisfaction correlations. Our approach positions environmental excellence as a premium amenity that enhances guest experience while reducing operational costs. We're not asking your properties to sacrifice luxury for sustainability. We're showing how environmental innovation can become a competitive advantage in the luxury hospitality market. The room's energy shifted as the executives recognized the strategic implications of this approach. Instead of viewing environmental improvements as regulatory compliance or corporate responsibility obligations, they could present them as exclusive features that justified premium pricing and attracted environmentally conscious luxury travelers. CEO Meridian leaned forward with obvious interest. Ms. Reynolds, you're describing a fundamental shift in how hospitality companies approach environmental initiatives. What gave you this insight? Extensive analysis of guest feedback data combined with market research into luxury travel preferences, I replied. But also personal experience with situations where people are told they need to accept less quality in exchange for meeting someone else's expectations. Guests don't want to compromise luxury for sustainability any more than they want to compromise authenticity for convenience. The personal reference was subtle but deliberate, acknowledging that my insights came from understanding both analytical data and human psychology in ways that purely technical approaches couldn't match. The presentation concluded with a detailed implementation timeline and projected outcomes that demonstrated both environmental impact and financial returns. As we gathered our materials, CEO Meridian approached me directly. Impressive work, Ms. Reynolds. You've given us a completely new framework for thinking about environmental initiatives. We'll have a decision by Friday. Walking out of that building, I felt a sense of professional accomplishment that had nothing to do with anyone else's validation. I had presented complex solutions to sophisticated business leaders and earned their respect through my own expertise and preparation. This was what success felt like when it belonged entirely to me. Marcus was waiting in the hotel lobby when I returned, reading financial newspapers and looking like exactly what he was, a successful businessman who'd chosen to spend his time supporting my career advancement rather than managing his own schedule around my needs. How did it go? He asked, setting aside his reading material with genuine interest. I think we have a real chance, I said, settling beside him on the lobby's leather sofa. They were engaged, asked detailed questions, and seemed genuinely interested in our approach rather than just comparing our prices to competitors. And how did you feel presenting it? The question was typically Marcus, focusing on my experience rather than just the business outcome. Like I was finally doing what I was meant to do all along. Like all those years of having my ideas dismissed were just preparation for this moment. That evening, we walked through downtown Austin as the sun set behind the skyline. The city looked different from this perspective, not like the place where I'd been systematically diminished, but like any other business destination where I happened to be pursuing professional opportunities. Do you miss anything about your life here? Marcus asked as we paused beside Lady Bird Lake, watching kayakers navigate the calm water. I miss the version of myself I thought I could become here, I admitted. But I like the version I actually became somewhere else much better. No regrets about leaving Derek? My only regret is that it took me so long to realize I deserved better than what he was offering. We were walking back toward the hotel when my phone rang. Alex's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with slight apprehension about receiving bad news. Natalie. Alex's voice was filled with excitement. Meridian just called. We got the contract. Full scope, 3-year timeline, everything we proposed. The news hit me with unexpected force. Not just relief or satisfaction, but a profound sense of vindication for every risk I'd taken since leaving Derek. This contract would establish my reputation in environmental consulting, provide financial security I'd earned through my own efforts, and demonstrate that the capabilities Derek had dismissed were actually valuable to people who understood their significance. There's more, Alex continued. CEO Meridian specifically requested that you serve as lead consultant for the entire project. You'll be working directly with their executive team, coordinating with property managers across all their locations, and representing EcoConsult at industry conferences, where they'll be showcasing their sustainability initiatives. After ending the call, Marcus and I stood on the sidewalk outside our hotel, while I processed the magnitude of what had just happened. 18 months after being abandoned at a gas station by a man who considered me incapable of sophisticated thinking, I was being entrusted with a multi-million-dollar project that would transform environmental consulting for an entire industry. Congratulations, Marcus said quietly, his pride evident despite his characteristic restraint. You've earned this, Natalie. Every bit of it. Thank you, I replied, thinking about all the ways he'd supported my development without trying to control or direct it, for believing in me before I remembered how to believe in myself. The flight back to Miami the next morning felt different from my departure 18 months earlier. Then, I'd been fleeing a situation that had become unbearable, running toward an uncertain future with nothing but hope and determination. Now I was returning to a life I'd built deliberately, carrying news of success that belonged entirely to my own efforts and expertise. The Meridian project officially launched in June with a comprehensive planning phase that required coordinating environmental assessments across 37 properties, while developing customized sustainability strategies for each location. My team expanded to include specialists in renewable energy, water conservation, waste management, and guest experience design, all reporting to me as lead consultant. The work was demanding but exhilarating. I spent my days analyzing operational data, conducting site visits, and developing implementation strategies that addressed both environmental objectives and business realities. My evenings were often consumed by conference calls with property managers, review sessions with technical specialists, and strategic planning meetings with Meridian executives who treated my recommendations as authoritative rather than advisory. Brooklyn observed the transformation in my professional confidence during one of our planning sessions for a resort property in Key West. You've become someone who expects to be taken seriously, she noted. It's a completely different energy from when you first started here. The observation was accurate. Somewhere during the months of building expertise and earning recognition, I'd stopped being surprised when people listened to my ideas and started expecting my contributions to be valued. The woman who'd apologized for offering suggestions had been replaced by someone who presented solutions with confidence in their merit. Marcus returned to Miami in July for an extended stay, ostensibly to provide security consulting for a tech entrepreneur who'd received threats from a former business partner. But he also made time for dinners, weekend trips to the Keys, and long conversations about our respective businesses that felt like the partnership I'd once imagined having with Derek. The difference was that Marcus supported my ambitions without trying to manage them, celebrated my successes without taking credit for them, and provided emotional stability that enhanced rather than replaced my independence. He was building his own business empire while encouraging mine, creating the kind of mutual respect that made both of us stronger individually. I've been thinking about expanding Chen Security Solutions to include consulting on corporate environmental security issues, Marcus mentioned during dinner at a restaurant overlooking the bay. Climate change is creating new types of business risks that traditional security firms aren't equipped to handle. That's brilliant, I said, immediately seeing the strategic implications. There's definitely growing demand for that kind of specialized expertise, especially in industries like hospitality, that depend on stable environmental conditions. I was hoping you might be interested in providing the environmental consulting component of those services. Not as a subcontractor, but as an equal partner in developing this new service offering. The proposal was intriguing both professionally and personally. Combining Marcus's security expertise with my environmental consulting knowledge would create unique value for clients facing increasingly complex risk management challenges. But more than the business opportunity, I was struck by his approach to partnership as collaboration between equals, rather than hierarchy with supporting roles. I'm definitely interested, I replied. But let's make sure we develop this as genuine collaboration, rather than one person's business with the other providing support services. Marcus smiled with the warmth I'd learned to recognize as his response to my direct communication style. I wouldn't have it any other way. Your expertise is as valuable as mine, and any partnership we create should reflect that equally. The Meridian project reached a major milestone in August when we completed environmental assessments for all 37 properties and presented comprehensive sustainability strategies to the corporate executive team. The presentation took place in their Austin headquarters, requiring another return to the city where my transformation had begun. This time, I felt no anxiety about being in Austin. The city had become simply another business destination, notable only because it contained a major client rather than because it held emotional significance. I was staying at the same hotel, eating at some of the same restaurants, but experiencing everything from the perspective of a successful consultant rather than a diminished wife. The presentation to Meridian's board of directors went beyond my most optimistic expectations. The sustainability strategies I'd developed promised environmental improvements that would reduce operational costs while enhancing guest satisfaction and creating marketing advantages for properties positioned as luxury eco-resorts. Ms. Reynolds, CEO Meridian, addressed me after reviewing our projected outcomes. Your work has exceeded every expectation we had when we awarded this contract. The board would like to discuss extending our agreement to include implementation support and ongoing environmental management for all Meridian properties. The extended contract would establish EcoConsult as Meridian's exclusive environmental consulting partner, providing steady revenue and industry credibility that would attract additional hospitality clients. More personally, it would cement my reputation as a leading expert in sustainable luxury hospitality, creating opportunities I'd never imagined when I fled Austin 18 months earlier. Walking out of that boardroom, I realized that my transformation was complete. Not just from Derek's wife to independent woman, but from someone who supported other people's ambitions to someone whose own expertise was valued by major corporations. I had built something meaningful through my own efforts, earned recognition through my own capabilities, and created financial security through my own professional development. That evening, Marcus and I had dinner at a restaurant downtown, celebrating the contract extension and discussing the business partnership we were developing. As we walked along the sidewalk afterward, I noticed we were only a few blocks from the gas station where Derek had abandoned me. Want to drive by? Marcus asked, having apparently made the same geographic connection. Actually, yes, I said, surprising myself with the answer. We drove to the rest stop in Marcus's rental car, pulling into the same parking area where I'd stood in the rain, wondering how my life had gone so wrong. The fluorescent lights cast the same harsh glow, and the convenience store looked exactly as I remembered it. But instead of feeling traumatized by the memory, I felt grateful for the catalyst that had forced me to rebuild my life on my own terms. Any regrets? Marcus asked as we sat in the car, looking at the spot where he'd first come to my rescue. Just one, I replied. I regret that it took Derek abandoning me here to realize I was capable of building something better than what he was offering. Everything happens when it's supposed to happen, Marcus said philosophically. You weren't ready to leave until you were ready to succeed on your own. Driving back toward downtown Austin, I thought about the woman who'd stood in this parking lot 18 months ago, soaked and abandoned and wondering if she had the strength to start over. That woman had been braver than she knew, taking risks that led to discoveries she couldn't have imagined. The life I'd built in Miami, the career I'd developed at EcoConsult, the relationship I was building with Marcus, all of it had grown from seeds planted during that terrible night when Derek showed me exactly how little my presence meant to him. Tomorrow, I would fly back to Miami and continue implementing sustainability strategies for luxury resorts throughout the Southeast. Next month, Marcus and I would begin developing our joint venture in environmental security consulting. By the end of the year, I would be presenting at industry conferences as a recognized expert in sustainable hospitality management. But tonight, sitting beside a man who saw my strength as attractive rather than threatening, returning from a business meeting where my expertise had been valued rather than dismissed, I felt the deep satisfaction of having built a life that reflected my actual worth rather than other people's limited expectations. The woman Derek had abandoned at this gas station was gone forever, replaced by someone who knew her own value and refused to accept anything less than she deserved. And tomorrow, the real test would begin when Derek himself would discover exactly how much he'd lost when he drove away from me in the rain. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 2 years after Derek had driven away from that gas station. I was reviewing implementation schedules for the Meridian project when my assistant knocked on my office door with an overnight delivery envelope marked urgent. Inside was an elegant cardstock invitation to the Austin Business Excellence Awards, an annual black tie event celebrating the city's most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders. Meridian Hospitality Group had been nominated for Environmental Innovation of the Year, and as their lead environmental consultant, I was invited to attend the ceremony as their guest. What made the invitation significant wasn't the recognition of our work, though I was proud of what we'd accomplished. It was the realization that Derek would almost certainly be there. Harper Development had been nominated in previous years, and Patricia Harper served on the selection committee. This would be our first encounter since I'd filed for divorce. The first time Derek would see what I'd become without his guidance or approval. Marcus was in Miami for the week, coordinating security arrangements for a celebrity client who was filming a movie in South Beach. When I called to tell him about the invitation, his response was characteristically direct. "How do you feel about seeing Derek again?" "Curious," I admitted. Not nervous or angry, just curious about how he'll react to who I've become. "And how do you want him to react?" The question made me pause. 2 years ago, I might have wanted Derek to regret losing me, to apologize for his treatment, to acknowledge that he'd been wrong about my capabilities. Now I realized I didn't need his validation or remorse. His opinion of me, positive or negative, no longer had any impact on my sense of self-worth. "I want him to understand that abandoning me was the best thing he could have done for my career," I said finally. Not because I need him to know that, but because it's true. The awards ceremony was scheduled for the Saturday before Thanksgiving, giving me 2 weeks to prepare. Not for confrontation or drama, but for representing myself and my work with the quiet confidence I'd developed through earning recognition on my own merit. Brooklyn offered to accompany me as moral support, but I decided to attend alone. This wasn't about proving anything to Derek or anyone else. It was about celebrating genuine professional achievement while remaining completely authentic to who I'd become. Marcus flew back to Miami the day before the ceremony, arriving at my apartment with a garment bag and a smile that suggested he'd been planning something. "I have a proposal," Marcus said, hanging the garment bag in my closet with careful precision. "Let me be your security detail for the awards ceremony." "I don't need security," I laughed. "It's a business awards dinner, not a war zone." "Not protection," Marcus clarified. "Presence. Someone who knows your worth standing beside you when you encounter people who didn't recognize it before." The offer was tempting, not because I needed emotional support, but because Marcus understood the symbolism involved. Arriving at this event with a successful, respected man who treated me as an equal would demonstrate how completely my life had changed. But I also wanted to be certain my motivations were authentic rather than competitive. "I want Derek to see who I've become," I said carefully. "But I don't want that to be about making him jealous, or proving I'm better off without him." "It's not about Derek," Marcus replied. "It's about you feeling comfortable and confident while representing your professional achievements. I'll be there as your partner, not as a prop for impressing your ex-husband." The distinction mattered. Marcus was offering genuine support rather than performance, partnership rather than rescue. The difference between his approach and Derek's possessiveness couldn't have been clearer. The dress I chose for the ceremony reflected everything I'd learned about projecting authentic confidence. Deep emerald silk that complemented my eyes without being overly dramatic, elegant but not attention-seeking, professional but unmistakably feminine. I had purchased it for a conference presentation earlier that year, and it had become my signature choice for events where I needed to feel powerful and comfortable simultaneously. Marcus wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that somehow managed to look both formal and subtly dangerous, the combination of elegance and controlled strength that characterized everything about him. When we arrived at the Omni Hotel's ballroom, other guests turned to look, not because we were trying to attract attention, but because we carried ourselves with the quiet authority that comes from genuine success. The ballroom was magnificent, all crystal chandeliers and draped silk, filled with Austin's business elite celebrating another year of economic growth and entrepreneurial achievement. I recognized faces from social events I'd attended as Derek's wife, but now I was seeing them from an entirely different perspective. Instead of being the supportive spouse making small talk about charity work, I was a nominated consultant whose environmental innovations were being recognized alongside the city's most successful business leaders. Brooklyn appeared at my elbow within minutes of our arrival, having driven up from Houston where she was conducting site assessments for another client. "You look amazing," she said, embracing me warmly. "And you look happy, which is even better." "I feel amazing," I replied honestly. 2 years ago, I couldn't have imagined being here as anything other than Derek's wife. Tonight I'm here because of my own work. The cocktail reception provided opportunities to reconnect with Austin business leaders I'd met during my marriage. But now they sought me out to discuss environmental consulting rather than making polite conversation with Derek's wife. The shift in how people engaged with me was profound and validating. "Natalie Reynolds," a familiar voice said behind me. I turned to find Harold Morrison, the investor whose withdrawal from Derek's project had precipitated our divorce. "I've been following your work with Meridian. Impressive results." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. The hospitality industry is finally recognizing that environmental innovation can be a competitive advantage, rather than just regulatory compliance." "Indeed. I'm curious about your perspective on sustainable development for mixed-use properties. Perhaps we could schedule a consultation next week." The conversation that followed was everything my interactions with Derek's business associates had never been. Morrison was treating me as a peer whose expertise he respected, not as a spouse whose presence was socially required. When we exchanged business cards, it felt like genuine professional networking rather than polite obligation. Marcus stayed close enough to provide subtle support without hovering, engaging in conversations with other security professionals, while remaining aware of my interactions. His presence was reassuring without being possessive, protective without being controlling. The contrast with Derek's management of my social interactions couldn't have been more stark. I was discussing renewable energy financing with a group of real estate developers when I caught sight of Derek across the ballroom. He looked older, more worn than I remembered, his confident smile seeming forced rather than natural. Patricia stood beside him, resplendent in navy blue and pearls, surveying the room with the calculating expression I remembered from countless social events. They hadn't noticed me yet, which gave me time to observe their interactions with other guests. Derek's networking seemed desperate rather than confident, his laughter too loud, and his handshakes too enthusiastic. Patricia's conversation appeared to focus on damage control rather than celebration, her body language suggesting they were working harder than usual to maintain their social position. Grace Harper appeared at my side before I realized she'd approached, looking elegant in a burgundy gown that complemented her medical professional's understated style. "Natalie," she said warmly, embracing me with genuine affection. "You look absolutely radiant. Success suits you." "Grace, it's wonderful to see you. How's the residency going?" "Brutal but rewarding. I'm specializing in emergency medicine, which means I understand something about helping people recover from traumatic situations." She glanced meaningfully toward her brother and mother. "Speaking of which, how do you feel about being in the same room as Derek again?" "Honestly, nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just curiosity about whether he's learned anything from the experience." Grace nodded approvingly. "That's probably the healthiest possible response. Derek, on the other hand, has been asking about you constantly since the divorce was finalized. Mom keeps telling him he needs to move forward, but I think he's finally realizing what he lost." Before I could respond, the lights dimmed, and an announcement requested that guests find their seats for dinner and the award ceremony. Meridian had reserved a table near the front of the ballroom, reflecting their status as major nominees. As we made our way toward our assigned seats, I found myself walking directly past Derek and Patricia's table. Derek saw me first, his expression cycling through surprise, recognition, and something that might have been awe. I looked different from the woman he'd married, not just because of the elegant dress and professional styling, but because of the confidence that now characterized my movement and presence. This wasn't the diminished wife who'd accepted his dismissal as accurate assessment. This was someone who knew her own worth and expected others to recognize it. "Natalie," Derek said, standing as we approached, "you look incredible." "Thank you," I replied graciously, without stopping to extend the conversation. Patricia's reaction was more complex. Her eyes took in my appearance, my obvious comfort in this setting, and the tall, handsome man whose hand rested protectively on my back. Her social skills were too refined to show obvious shock, but I caught the moment when she realized that the woman she'd dismissed as inadequate had become someone who commanded respect in rooms like this. "Natalie, darling," Patricia said, rising to air-kiss my cheeks with practiced social grace. "How lovely to see you. You look wonderful." "Thank you, Patricia. I hope you're both well." The exchange was perfectly polite and completely empty of genuine warmth. We were performing social courtesy rather than engaging in meaningful interaction, which suited me perfectly. I had no interest in rehashing past grievances or pretending our relationship had been anything other than strategic manipulation on her part. Marcus stepped slightly closer, his presence subtly claiming space in the conversation without being aggressive. Derek's eyes flicked to him with obvious curiosity and something that looked like concern. "Derek, Patricia, I'd like you to meet Marcus Chen," I said smoothly. Marcus owns Chen Security Solutions. The introduction was deliberately professional, establishing Marcus's credentials without explaining our personal relationship. Derek shook Marcus's hand with visible uncertainty, clearly trying to determine whether this was a business associate or something more significant. "Chen Security," Derek repeated, his voice suggesting he recognized the company name. "You provide protection services for major development projects." "Among other things," Marcus replied evenly. "We're expanding into environmental security consulting, actually." Natalie's been invaluable in helping us understand the intersection between environmental risks and business protection. The casual mention of our professional collaboration established that Marcus and I worked together as equals, not that he was simply my date for the evening. Derek's expression shifted as he processed this information, perhaps beginning to understand that my life had become more complex and successful than he'd imagined. "Well," Patricia said with forced brightness, "we should let you get to your table. Enjoy the ceremony." As we continued toward our seats, I felt Derek's eyes following our progress. Not with the possessive gaze of someone who still considered me his property, but with the confused attention of someone trying to understand how drastically I'd changed since our marriage ended. The Meridian table was filled with executives and their spouses, all of whom greeted me with the respect accorded to the consultant whose work had earned their company national recognition. CEO Meridian introduced Marcus to the group, explaining his role in our upcoming environmental security venture, and I felt a deep satisfaction in being part of conversations that treated both of us as accomplished professionals. Dinner conversation focused on business strategies and industry trends, the kind of substantive discussion I'd always wanted to participate in but had been excluded from during my marriage. When Sandra Liu asked for my perspective on regulatory changes affecting hospitality environmental standards, I found myself leading a 20-minute discussion that engaged the entire table. Natalie's insights into guest psychology have revolutionized our approach to environmental improvements, CEO Meridian told the group. Instead of viewing sustainability as operational overhead, we're positioning it as luxury amenities that justify premium pricing. The recognition felt different from any praise I'd received during my marriage. This acknowledgement was based on specific achievements I'd accomplished through my own expertise, not on my success at supporting someone else's ambitions. The awards ceremony began with recognition of achievement in various business categories. I listened to speeches celebrating innovation, leadership, and economic contribution, while observing Derek's table from my peripheral vision. He seemed distracted, his attention divided between the presentations and glances toward our table. When the environmental innovation category was announced, I felt a flutter of genuine nervousness. Not about winning or losing, but about receiving recognition for work that represented my authentic capabilities rather than reflected glory from someone else's achievements. The Environmental Innovation Award recognizes companies that have demonstrated exceptional commitment to sustainable business practices while maintaining competitive advantage, the presenter announced. This year's winner has revolutionized environmental consulting for the luxury hospitality industry, proving that sustainability and profitability are complementary rather than competing objectives. The pause felt eternal before the announcement. Meridian Hospitality Group, for their comprehensive sustainability transformation led by environmental consultant Natalie Reynolds. The applause was thunderous as CEO Meridian rose to accept the award, but he immediately gestured for me to join him on stage. Walking toward the podium, I caught Derek's expression of complete shock as he realized that I wasn't just attending this ceremony as someone's guest, but being honored for my own professional achievements. This award belongs as much to our environmental consultant as to Meridian, CEO Meridian said into the microphone. Natalie Reynolds brought vision, expertise, and innovation that transformed how we approach environmental responsibility. Her work proves that the right consultant doesn't just solve problems, they identify opportunities that create competitive advantages. When he handed me the microphone, I felt a moment of pure clarity about how far I'd traveled from the woman Derek had abandoned at that gas station. "Thank you," I said, looking out over the ballroom filled with Austin's business leaders. Environmental consulting succeeds when it enhances rather than constrains business objectives. Sustainability isn't about accepting limitations. It's about discovering possibilities that others haven't recognized. The speech was brief but confident, delivered by someone who belonged on that stage rather than someone grateful for the opportunity to be there. As I walked back to our table, I passed Derek's table again and saw him staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Genuine respect mixed with profound regret. The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur of congratulations and networking conversations. Austin business leaders who'd barely acknowledged my existence during my marriage now sought me out to discuss potential consulting projects. The transformation wasn't just personal, it was professional and social, reflecting a complete shift in how I was perceived and how I perceived myself. During the post-ceremony reception, I was discussing expansion opportunities with potential clients when Derek approached me. He waited politely for a break in the conversation before speaking. "Natalie, could I have a moment?" I excused myself from the business discussion and followed Derek to a quieter corner of the ballroom, curious about what he wanted to say. Marcus remained within sight but didn't intrude, trusting me to handle whatever conversation Derek had initiated. "Congratulations," Derek said, his voice carrying none of the casual dismissiveness I remembered. "I had no idea you were working on projects of this magnitude." "Thank you," I replied neutrally, waiting to see where this conversation was heading. "I owe you an apology," Derek continued, his words coming slowly as if he'd rehearsed them but found them difficult to deliver. "I underestimated your capabilities. I dismissed your contributions. I treated you as if your ideas weren't valuable when they clearly were." The apology was more complete than I'd expected, but it arrived 2 years too late to have any impact on my emotional well-being. I'd moved beyond needing Derek's acknowledgement of his mistakes to find peace with my own worth. "I appreciate you saying that," I said calmly. "But honestly, Derek, your opinion of my capabilities isn't relevant to my life anymore." Derek flinched as if I'd slapped him. "Natalie, I know I hurt you. I know I made mistakes, but seeing you tonight, seeing what you've accomplished, I can't help wondering if there's any possibility of us talking about..." "About what?" I interrupted gently. "About getting back together? About trying again?" Derek nodded hopefully, apparently misreading my calm tone as potential interest. "Derek," I said quietly, "the woman you married doesn't exist anymore. She was replaced by someone who knows her own worth and refuses to accept anything less than she deserves. The life I've built isn't something I'd be willing to risk for someone who's already proven he doesn't value what I have to offer." "But I do value it now," Derek protested. "Seeing your success, understanding what you're capable of, I realize how wrong I was." "You value it now because it's been validated by other people's recognition," I corrected. "That's not the same as valuing me." "If my work with Meridian hadn't won this award," If other business leaders weren't seeking my expertise, would you have the same respect for my capabilities? Derek's hesitation answered the question more clearly than words could have. That's what I thought, I said gently. You're not apologizing because you've learned to value my perspective. You're apologizing because you've learned that other people value it, and you're worried you might have made a mistake by letting me go. Maybe that's true, Derek admitted. But does it matter why I'm apologizing if I'm genuinely sorry? It matters because it tells me you still don't understand what was wrong with our marriage. You didn't respect me enough to take my ideas seriously until they'd been validated by external success. That's not a foundation for partnership. It's a foundation for conditional approval based on other people's opinions. The conversation was painful for Derek, but liberating for me. I was finally able to articulate everything I'd realized about our relationship, without anger or blame, simply stating facts about incompatible approaches to partnership and respect. Is there anything I could do or say that would change your mind? Derek asked desperately. Derek, I'm not angry with you anymore. I'm not hurt or bitter or looking for revenge. I'm grateful to you for showing me that I deserved better than what you were offering, because that realization led me to build something much more fulfilling than what we had together. You mean him? Derek glanced toward Marcus, who was engaged in conversation with several Meridian executives. I mean everything. My career, my independence, my sense of self-worth. My relationship with someone who sees my strength as attractive rather than threatening. You helped me discover all of that by demonstrating what I didn't want in my life. Derek stared at me for a long moment, perhaps finally understanding that this wasn't a temporary separation or a phase one was going through. This was a complete transformation that had made our entire relationship obsolete. I suppose I should say I'm happy for you, Derek said finally. You should say that if it's true, I replied. But honestly, Derek, whether you're happy for me or not doesn't affect my happiness. That's the difference between who I am now and who I was when we were married. As Derek walked away, looking older and more defeated than when he'd approached, I felt a profound sense of closure. Not because I'd gotten revenge or proved my superiority, but because I'd been able to articulate my growth without needing his understanding or approval. Marcus appeared at my side within moments, somehow knowing that the conversation was over and I might want support. How was that? He asked quietly. Exactly what I needed, I replied. He apologized, admitted he was wrong, and asked if we could try again. And I realized that none of that matters to me anymore. Because you've moved beyond needing his validation. Because I've moved beyond needing anyone's validation except my own. Derek's opinion of me, positive or negative, doesn't change who I've become or what I've accomplished. The rest of the evening passed in celebration and networking conversations that felt natural rather than forced. I exchanged business cards with potential clients, discussed collaboration opportunities with other consultants, and accepted congratulations from colleagues who treated my success as both earned and expected. Patricia approached me near the end of the reception, looking elegant but tired in a way that suggested the evening hadn't gone as she'd planned. Natalie, she said with her characteristic blend of graciousness and calculation, I wanted to congratulate you on your success. Your work with Meridian is quite impressive. Thank you, Patricia, I replied politely, noting that she was making an effort, but not feeling obligated to make the interaction easier for her. I hope you know that I always believed you had potential, Patricia continued, apparently attempting to rewrite history. I simply thought Derek needed someone who would challenge him more professionally. The statement was revealing in its defensiveness. Patricia was trying to position her treatment of me as strategic mentoring rather than systematic undermining. But the revisionism was too transparent to be convincing. I think Derek needed exactly what he had, I said calmly. Someone who supported his ambitions without threatening his ego. I needed something different. Someone who valued my capabilities rather than managing them. Patricia's smile became more forced, as she realized I wasn't going to pretend our relationship had been anything other than what it was. Well, she said with false brightness, I'm glad everything worked out for the best. It did, I agreed, though probably not in the way any of us expected. After Patricia walked away, Brooklyn appeared with champagne and a knowing smile. How does it feel to be gracious to people who tried to convince you that you weren't good enough? Liberating, I said honestly. Because I don't need them to acknowledge their mistakes for me to know my worth. Their opinion of me is irrelevant to my opinion of myself. The drive back to our hotel was quiet and comfortable, both Marcus and I processing the events of the evening. The confrontation with Derek had been less dramatic than I'd anticipated, but more meaningful. Instead of vindication or revenge, I'd experienced something more valuable, complete emotional independence from his judgment. No regrets about anything you said tonight? Marcus asked as we pulled into the hotel parking garage. None, I replied. Derek got the honesty he probably needed to hear, and I got the closure I didn't know I needed. It's finished in a way that feels clean, rather than bitter. In our hotel room, I hung up the emerald dress that had made me feel powerful and authentic, thinking about the woman who'd worn it to accept recognition for environmental consulting work that had transformed an entire industry's approach to sustainability. That woman bore little resemblance to the person Derek had abandoned at a gas station 2 years earlier. Marcus emerged from the bathroom and found me standing by the window, looking out over Austin's skyline illuminated against the night sky. What are you thinking about? He asked, settling into the chair beside the window. About how strange it is to feel grateful for the worst night of my life, I said. If Derek hadn't abandoned me at that gas station, I might never have found the courage to leave. I might have spent years accepting diminishment as the price of security. Everything happens for a reason, Marcus said, even when we can't see the reason until much later. The woman Derek left at that gas station was broken and dependent and afraid of her own shadow. The woman who accepted that award tonight is confident and successful and completely self-sufficient. I couldn't have become the second without experiencing the first. Marcus stood and moved to the window beside me, his presence warm and reassuring without being possessive. And what about the woman who's standing here now? What does she want? The question was loaded with implications about our relationship, about the future we might build together, about whether I was ready for partnership that enhanced rather than diminished my independence. She wants to continue building something meaningful with someone who sees her strength as an asset rather than a threat, I said, turning to face him. She wants to find out what two successful, independent people can create together when they choose collaboration instead of competition. Marcus smiled with the warmth that had attracted me from our first conversation. That sounds like a partnership worth investing in. It does, I agreed, feeling the same certainty that had guided me through leaving Derek, rebuilding my career, and creating a life that reflected my authentic values. The next morning, we flew back to Miami to continue building our respective businesses and our joint venture in environmental security consulting. The award ceremony had provided closure with my past and validation of my present, but more importantly, it had confirmed that my transformation was complete and irreversible. 6 months later, Chen Reynolds Environmental Security Solutions would be providing consulting services to major corporations throughout the Southeast, combining Marcus's expertise in risk management with my knowledge of environmental business strategy. Our partnership would be featured in industry publications as an innovative approach to emerging climate-related security challenges. A year after that, we would be married on a beach in Key Largo, surrounded by friends who celebrated our union as the collaboration of two successful, independent people who'd chosen to build something together rather than trying to complete each other. But that November night in Austin, standing in a hotel room overlooking the city where my transformation had begun, I felt the deep satisfaction of having built a life that belonged entirely to me. Derek had given me an unexpected gift when he abandoned me at that gas station: the motivation to discover my own strength and the courage to use it. The woman he'd left behind was gone forever, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and refused to accept anything less than she deserved. And in the end, that transformation was worth every moment of pain it had taken to achieve it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.